Hiya, welcome to my Compound Life. I'm your host, Jonathan. This is a channel where we talk about different things, right? So, my Compound Life, this is where we build assets, build habits, and build freedom. Usually, that leads on to financial freedom, time freedom, and so forth, right? So, thanks for watching. Before we get started, I'm kind of low in my subscriber counts. So if you can, just hit the like, hit subscribe. Even if you don't like my content, just hit the like, hit subscribe. I promise I will keep on improving my content, right? So I'm still a rather small-ish, well, indeed, I'm very, very small content creator. So the more you can hit like, the more you can hit subscribe, I'll be really thankful. Okay, so let's get started. In today's video, what we want to talk about is why do people still buy Bitcoin? Okay, and who's still actually buying Bitcoin right now? Because to my understanding, the search volume on Google is all-time low. No one cares about Bitcoin. No one cares about crypto or whatever, right? So we're kind of in a doom situation because there are no new buyers coming in to buy our Bitcoin, and hence the price not increasing, right? So right now, everyone is talking about AI, right? AI stocks are pumping full of hype and fast money. Bitcoin, it dropped from the high of $126,000 in early October, and now it's come back down to about 88,000 or 86,000. I think it's 85,000 from the time of recording, 86 to 88. So we're range bound, right? And the fact that I do anticipate will drop even further after the Japanese Bank of Japan rate hike, it doesn't look good, right? So a lot of people say Bitcoin is old news, too slow. AI is the future, right? So what do you mean? Are we now comparing AI with Bitcoin now, right? But here's the truth. The people buying Bitcoin today are very different from the people buying last cycle. This is no longer just a young retail trader or crypto trader, okay? So today's buyer are wealthy boomers, family offices, private banks, pension-style allocators, and corporate treasuries. The most conservative money in the world are buying Bitcoin, right? Less of a you and I, like the retail traders that kind of got into Bitcoin much earlier in the years, right? So this is like my third cycle. We are not the key buyers of Bitcoin anymore, right? The bigger whales, right? Not the OG whales of Bitcoin. I mean the big wealthy individuals are getting into Bitcoin. Okay, so that's why it kind of reflect the price indication, right? Of course it's lower, but a lot of time Bitcoin gets scooped up really fast. The more, the lower it drops. So kind of like the weak hand, right? If you're selling Bitcoin right now, you're the weak hand. I'm sorry to say that. You are selling, you are transferring wealth from your hands, the weak hands, onto the wealthy, smart money. Okay. So why do people still buy Bitcoin? Reason number one, okay, store of value. Why conservative wealth choose Bitcoin? Okay, so Bitcoin is incredibly treated as digital gold, especially by wealth preservation investors. So there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And then we are already 95% mine that 21 million Bitcoin. So there would be no dilution, no printing. This is why family offices generational wealth investors and boomers nearing retirement are now paying attention. Okay, so everyone want to get into Bitcoin to preserve wealth for their children, for their grandchildren, and the many generations to come. And I reckon we're just doing the same too, right? This is why we're into Bitcoin. This is why in my compound life, I invested into properties, although I've stopped investing into properties now. And I'm more into Bitcoin now because it can carries that generational wealth, passing of the wealth to different generations. And, and and this is so exciting. And this is why I'm creating a video to inform you about this. And of course, traditional money loses value when government print too much. Okay, so if you're not subscribed to my channel, right, you should, because every day I'll update in terms of what the US government are doing, what the UK government are doing. Essentially, they are printing more money, more of the currency that you hold. Could be your US dollars, could be my Great British pounds, and so forth, right? And whenever they print, your money, your buying power will be less, right? And Bitcoin kind of fixes this, right? And Bitcoin is predictable and transparent. So qualities conservative capital loves. So Tom Lee from Fundstrat explained Bitcoin in a interesting manner. So Tom Lee would say it behaves like gold in crisis and like a growth asset when liquidity expands. Okay, so this is like pretty amazing, right? So uh, in when there are uncertainty, of course, people still buy gold, right? At the same time, during uncertainty period, people also buy Bitcoin, okay, because it behaves like gold in crisis. And at the same time, when there are liquidity, when US Feds are printing a lot of money and pushing it down the system, Bitcoin turns to like a growth asset. Every time when the US Fed print money, what you'll be experiencing will be your growth stocks, your Tesla, your Nvidia, your Alphabet, your Amazon, your Meta stocks starts to rise really rapidly, right? The same applies for Bitcoin, right? So you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? And that volatility scares short-term traders away, right? But long-term allocators understand this is how new asset classes matured. And of course, Raoul Pal, I think it's Raoul Paul, often talks about Metcalfe's law. As more people, institutions, banks use Bitcoin, the network becomes exponentially stronger. So to that extent, we are still early in adoption. Most family offices globally still have zero Bitcoin exposure. They're still trying to figure out, right? They still, because globally there'll be so many wealthy people and a lot of banks, they're not like the US or even like the UK that are catching up with the Bitcoin technology. So they cannot offer immediately Bitcoin to a lot of these wealthy individuals, right? So in a way, we are still early. That's not saturation, that's a runway, okay? So compare this to gold. Gold supply keeps increasing every year through mining, right? Countries like Australia and Russia, I think recently Iran called out they discovered some major gold mine. So these countries have massive unminted reserves. So in a way, of course, gold will take time. The government cannot just go out and print it, right? But the gold supply, it's still pretty unlimited for now in comparison to Bitcoin, of course. So Bitcoin supply is absolutely capped forever, 21 million. And remember that, right? That's why many wealth managers now call it a superior digital gold. Okay? And why do people still buy Bitcoin, right? I'll give you reason number 2. ETFs and institutions. And interesting, what you find in these ETF institutions, the buyer profile kind of change, right? So this cycle is fundamentally different because Bitcoin ETF change who can buy, right? Bitcoin is no longer accessed through risky exchanges like me and you uses, or self-custody only, right? Previously, for us to buy Bitcoin, we have to buy through exchange. We need to find ways to onboard our Great British Pound, US dollars into buying stable coin. Then we can go in and buy Bitcoin, right? But nowadays, we don't need that anymore. ETFs makes it much more accessible for anyone, right? Now, it's held inside regulated brokerage accounts, pensions, trusts, and private banks. Okay, so BlackRock leads with Bitcoin ETF holding tens of billions of asset under management. Even Vanguard, historically anti-Bitcoin, now allows ETF access to up to 50 millions of their current customers, right? So I even have Vanguard in the UK. Just a caveat, Vanguard in the UK, we can't get access to Bitcoin ETF just yet, but I reckon it's coming very, very soon, okay? And besides, if you're buying Bitcoin ETF in the UK, there's no rush, right? There's still so much uncertainty in the UK HMRC kind of wrapper. I think we can simply just wait. If you're thinking of buying Bitcoin ETP, ETN, ETF, whatever in the UK, right? So Bank of America even tells their client to allocate 4% to Bitcoin/crypto. Okay, so there's so much push going on. So this isn't textbook portfolio construction language, and not speculation at all, right? So this becomes kind of like a playbook for individual investors now, because there's so much advice going through it, essentially onboarding more of the TradFi people, heavyweight investors to start to come into buying Bitcoin. Okay, so even corporate are also buying for treasury reserves, right? So MicroStrategy, the company owned by Michael Saylor, holds over, I think, 671,000 Bitcoin. Okay, and he is continuously buying. Okay, Marathon Digital, I think it's a miner. They held well over 50,000 Bitcoin. Riot Platform, they're accumulating Bitcoin. Japan's MetaPlanet, they're also accumulating Bitcoin. Even the UK listed companies, I think there's a company called the Smarter Web Company, another company called B Hodl, and another company called Satsuma Technology, right? Although I think Satsuma Technology recently started to sell off some Bitcoin, but these are companies that see the future of money, and that's why they are investing or heavily accumulating Bitcoin. So these buyers are not traders or investors like you and I that buy in a very, very small scale, right? So I still need to caveat, although big players, big whales, big institutions are coming in to buy Bitcoin, it doesn't raise the barrier of entry. Bitcoin, you and I can still buy small amount. If you want, you can buy big amounts too, and still make a good living, make and still provide us the ability to retire early, right? So these buyers are not traders, they're not investors, right? However, they are the balance sheet managers, risk committee, and long-term allocators of Bitcoin. So here's the key few points. ETFs and corporate are buying more Bitcoin per day than new supply created. Okay, so if you have subscribed to my Compound Life on a daily basis, I would actually go through how much the ETF are buying on a daily basis. Will that be inflows or outflows? And you can essentially see the buying are pretty consistent, right? So at present, there are only 450 Bitcoin that can be minted on a daily basis, right? ETF alone buy well over that amount. Even strategy, they buy well over that amount. So the supply shock of Bitcoin is hitting. It's definitely hitting right now. Okay, and that usually would mean one thing, right? Eventually, Bitcoin price will go up higher because it's a cap supply of 21 million Bitcoin. And of course, institutions don't panic sell, right? So volatility is lower than the past few cycles, and that's a good thing. If you are novice investor, or if you are investor that doesn't really like speculating or loves volatility, Bitcoin will be the right asset in addressing that very, very soon. Okay, so so this is why I still don't foresee a blow off top for this cycle, right? So there are still people thinking that no, Bitcoin 4-year cycle has now been extended to 5 years. Personally, I kind of see the 4-year cycle has already ended. There's no blow off top because it's all due to ETF buying, right? So ETF, they will rebalance their portfolio. So every now and then they buy and sell just so that, they rebalance, right? And for now, Bank of America are advising people, investors, to allocate at least 4%, right? If Bank of America sees Bitcoin potential and will potentially return greater CAGRs on a yearly basis, that recommendation next year, the year after, will definitely raise, right? So in that case, the supply shock will, all of this combined will definitely push the price higher, right? So to me, Bitcoin is not dead. However, it simply means blow off top will essentially be kept, and Bitcoin now will be slower, but much more of a stable asset that still gives better return than any of the asset class out there. Okay. Reason number 3, Bitcoin inside traditional finance, why boomers are finally comfortable, right? So this is the biggest psychological shift. Bitcoin is no longer fighting the banking system. It's being absorbed by it. Regulation is clearer, no doubt. I update you guys every now and then when the new regulations that comes out. I'll do so through our daily Bitcoin video. SEC clarify custody rules. US banks can now offer Bitcoin services to their customers, and major banks now offer Bitcoin back loans, right? Whew, that's good, right? So you don't really have to sell your Bitcoin nowadays. In the US, not yet in the UK, but it will come, right? Give it some time, a year or two also, it will come, so that next time we won't need to sell our Bitcoin, right? And selling Bitcoin will essentially, get us trapped with such a high capital gain tax. We don't have to sell anymore, right? We can use Bitcoin as collateral, get some money out, pay for stuff, etc. Okay, so that will be the future, and that's a future that I believe you and I really look forward to. Too. Okay, and of course, yeah, where was I? So wealthy boomers and family offices, this matter more than price. Okay, so these individuals, what they want is they want legal clarity, which they're getting. They want custody solutions, which they're also getting now, portfolio integration, and of course, risk management. Okay, so Bitcoin has now been that asset able to address all of this. So that's very good. Uh, in a world of AI innovation and exponential tech growth, you might wonder, is it still worth the while to set money aside for Bitcoin versus buying speculative tech uh, stocks and shares, right? So you just need to think of it this way. Bitcoin plays a different role. It's much more for capital protection. Of course, tech companies, everyone are pivoting into AI. AI builds productivity. So Bitcoin protects purchasing power. That's why there's no conflict, right? The investment is not, do I invest on AI stock versus do I invest on Bitcoin, right? Yes, invest in both. In my compound life, I actually encourage that we should really diversify, right? But you diversify for a reason. You don't diversify because people talks about it on the internet, right? But you diversify for a reason, right? AI, you're investing in improving productivity, whereas Bitcoin helps us to protect our purchasing power, right? So if you want to balance, maybe half-half. However, I do see, the risk of investing too much into AI. What if it's a bubble, right? I still need to maintain and retain my purchasing power. So that's why Bitcoin should really be my bigger bag, right? Not investment advice, but uh, just my thought of how I should allocate my capital. And of course, reason four, uh, performance and cycle, why professionals still allocate into Bitcoin. I think despite the volatility, Bitcoin remain one of the best performing asset in history, right? So long-term average, Bitcoin still returns 100 to 200% in strong cycle. I think in the recent cycle from the bottom onto I think 16,000 onto about $126,000 Bitcoin, we essentially did about 10x. Okay, so that's very good, right? In comparison to S&P 500, it gives you a good 10 to 15% annual return, right? But when after I've invested in Bitcoin versus S&P 500, the return on S&P 500, it's not as attractive as setting aside money for Bitcoin anymore, right? Understand we don't have a lot of savings. Understand that we do not, some of you guys may even have difficulties climbing the property ladder in the UK, right? So in that case, I'm not saying to go all in. However, I'm just indicating that don't miss this opportunity on Bitcoin, right? Because I've seen it. I'm just an ordinary investor. I used to work in the UK, but I was blessed enough to found a role in China. So I took on that role. I did about 13 years in China before coming back. So I was earning like six-figure income for a good extended period of time that permits me to save to invest into properties, into Bitcoin, into stocks and shares, into ETF, etc., etc. And once I've discovered Bitcoin, right? Of course, I've done my properties first. So I've done the more secured investment. I had ETF, etc. These are more secured investments. But once I've gotten into Bitcoin, I was like, wow, if only I have gotten in earlier. That's always on my mind. Okay, so I don't want you guys to miss on that opportunity too, right? Yeah, so S&P 500, 10 to 15% annual return. If you consider that good, that's great, right? Professional investor, they don't chase tops, right? So that's why I always talk about there's a shift in terms of who actually buys Bitcoin this time around, right? They allocate small percentage consistently, and so we are post 2024 halving, right? Historically, 12 to 18 months after halving is where sustained upside appears, right? And essentially, you will be able to see the return if you're holding Bitcoin, of course. Of course, apart from telling you who are buying, why they're buying, etc., there's always risk with investment, any type of investment. So I just want to call out certain counterpoints and make sure if you're holding Bitcoin, you also watch some of this indicator every now and then, right? So investing in Bitcoin is not exactly risk-free either, okay? Bitcoin can still drop during liquidity stress, like what's happening right now. US government shutdown, low liquidity, people are diverting their investments away from Bitcoin and into gold or into silver. Crazy, right? Because the fact that Bitcoin is digital gold, yes, more of the traditional people, old school investors, they still prefer gold, right? So that's why liquidity stress we are experiencing right now, you're actually seeing that. And of course, it correlates with equity short term, like equity market doing well, Bitcoin pumps. If it doesn't do well, Bitcoin drops. Even if Bitcoin drops, doesn't mean equity drops too, right? So it has correlation, but more affecting Bitcoin price action. And of course, Bitcoin fluctuation, it's always down to leverage flushes, right? Every time when you see a huge green candle on a Bitcoin or a huge, massive red candle, it's essentially the green one is because of short squeeze, right? There are a lot of shorts traders and long traders on Bitcoin asset because exchanges, they allow up to 100x kind of a margin for longs and shorts, right? So I'm not here to talk about long and shorts. I reckon in order for in order for us to manage our capital, our investment wisely in my compound life, the best is to just buy spot and hodl. And you will definitely see the return, right? Not in 10 years' time. Give yourself one cycle. Cycle takes about 4 years. Okay, so you definitely see that return. Put it this way, every cycle Bitcoin will be declared dead, right? So I think a lot of people are declaring Bitcoin is dead right now on social media. Just ignore them. Just ignore them. And every cycle, the beginning of the cycle, you definitely see that Bitcoin always returns stronger with better infrastructure, better and stronger, wealthier buyers, and so forth, right? You definitely see that in the next cycle. So, conclusion, who Bitcoin is really for now. So, why do people still buy Bitcoin, right? Because today's buyers are Bitcoin, it's still you and I buying, right? The retail. we do not have to be ultra rich. The barrier of entry of buying Bitcoin is very, very low, right? I've received some calls earlier from some, uh, it was actually from eToro platform, and they were like asking me to buy some of their funds, some algorithmic funds. And I think some of the entry barrier was you need to put in at least £10,000. Okay, it's not a lot of money, but to put in that fund, you need at least £10,000, right? And understand not a lot of us or you guys can actually immediately put forward £10,000, right? So this is why for Bitcoin, pound cost average, dollar cost average absolutely works, right? You don't need £10,000. You can immediately start off with £10, £10 a day, right? How about that? Cut down your latte, right? So you can put in £5 a day or something, right? And let that compound, right? So that's the power of compounding for Bitcoin, and that's something that you eventually learn more from my channel, My Compound Life. So hit the like, hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. Become my 27th to 30th of subscriber. Leave a comment and let me know who you are. Yeah, so of course, Bitcoin are for wealthy boomers now. They are protecting their purchasing power. Family offices trying to diversify away from fiat risk, right? Institutions building long-term exposure because they know that holding cash are just essentially holding, melting ice cubes, right? And of course, corporate strengthening their balance sheet. The same idea. No one wants to hold cash when the US government can just print an unlimited amount. When our UK Labour government can print an unlimited amount. That's not the right way. So, come on, guys. This dip doesn't look like an ending for Bitcoin. We just need to get through it, accept the fact that maybe we are heading to a bear market, but it gives us the opportunity to reaccumulate, right? Yeah, so seriously, don't leave Bitcoin. Okay, if you're new to this, you should also continue to consider to continue and start stacking. So not financial advice, do your own research, only invest what you can hold through volatility. Okay, ask yourself the question, if the most conservative money in the world is buying Bitcoin now, why? So I've given you a lot of why, right? Let me know in the comments, are you stacking? Are you holding? Or watching from the sidelines, right? So let me know in the comment section. And last final thoughts, is Bitcoin still worth investing in? Yes, for the long-term allocators, I think definitely. As of December 15, December 17th today, Bitcoin price is around 86,000. Although we dropped tremendously, but the fundamental of Bitcoin is still very strong. Okay, ETFs absorbing all the supply, banks onboarding wealthy clients, corporate accumulating, countries, nations are accumulating, and of course, I do feel the volatility has definitely dropped in comparison to the previous few cycles. Maybe you guys think differently. Let me know in the comments. So short term, it's very uncertain, right? Because we're simply just waiting for what's going to happen with the Japanese Bank of Japan rate hike. And of course, long-term Bitcoin is becoming a core alternative asset to gold, right? So we are still early in institutions adoption. We're not late. The entry to Bitcoin, it's very low, right? And this is how generational wealth is built. Okay, trust me, it will be built. Give yourself one cycle, 4 years. Okay, so yeah, that's it. That's all I want to share today. And thanks for watching. Please hit the like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.